I woke early the next morning. Sleeping in didn't have the same appeal when your bed consisted of a wadded up jacket over crushed asphalt. Ate a protein bar and hit the road. Despite it being August, patches of snow still glowed white in the mountaintops. With the snow melting, the high elevation air was like a walk in freezer, and I shivered uncontrollably in my seat. On a motorcycle, you became part of the environment as you passed through, permanently if you were unlucky. The bike had no temperature control, no magic buttons that lowered or raised the heat, no windows to roll up to keep out the rain and wind. My bike didn't even have a radio, leaving me with nothing for entertainment but a few mangled song lyrics running through my head in a constant loop. Johnny Cash mashing into Flogging Molly and Janis Joplin. The cold weather was a problem because, unlike a car, which you could drive with your knee while eating a bowl of Frosted Flakes and sexting your girlfriend, a motorcycle required your whole body. Shifting your weight helped to steer. While the left foot shifted, right foot controlled the rear brake, right hand controlled the front brake and throttle, and left hand operated the clutch and told passing motorists how you felt about their driving, which only required the middle digit. The road was twisty, and I steered the bike as much by shifting my hips as pressing the handlebars, all while gripping my jacket's collar shut against the wind with my clutch hand. Still half asleep and paying more attention to the cold than the road, I cut around a curve just in time to see a brown blur jump from the overgrown shoulder directly in front of me. As I screeched toward the deer frozen in the center of my lane, there wasn't time for thoughts of a poetic nature, unless poetry could be expressed solely in four-letter words. "Fuck!" I yelled, my voice shockingly loud inside the helmet. My left hand released my collar, snatching at the clutch while my right foot and hand jammed on both brakes. The rear tire locking slipped on the pavement. Beneath me, I felt the ass end sliding forward, moving faster than the front, threatening to turn me sideways. Shifting my weight and releasing the rear brake, the bike snapped back into line. With a jerk, the front tire finally stopped just a few feet shy of the deer's ribs. My left foot fell off the peg, catching the bike as it started to fall. I let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and the grimace slowly disappeared from my face. The deer, apparently as shocked as I was, didn't run off. Instead, it stood in the middle of my lane, staring at me with its big black eyes as if it was entranced. My heart beat hard enough that I felt it in my neck, but on the upside, I wasn't so preoccupied with the cold anymore. Put the kickstand down, walk over there, and punch Bambi in its stupid face. You know, it's thoughts like that make me worry about us. As if it heard my inner dialogue, the deer's ear twitched, breaking it out of its trance, and it scrambled down the opposite bank, leaving me parked alone in the middle of the road. I shook my head, the helmet slapping my shoulders, and clenched and released my fists, trying to force myself to calm down. Finally, I pressed the shifter down into first and rode away, trying to ignore the thought that this was only my second day on the trip, and I'd already almost wrecked. The worst part about it was knowing that it was going to happen again, and there was nothing I could do about it. A little-known fact about deer was that they'd evolved specifically to stand along roadways pretending to eat, only to launch themselves into the path of oncoming traffic at the last second. Scientists weren't sure why they'd developed this odd behavior, but some believed that it was because deer had come to enjoy the shocked look on a driver's face just before it smashed into the airbag. The only other logical explanation for why they'd become the suicide bombers of the animal kingdom was that they were waging a secret war against minivans. That could explain why there were roughly 1.5 million deer-related accidents every year. In a car, with its seatbelts, airbags, and crumple zones, hitting a deer was an annoyance, a broken headlight, and late to work. On a motorcycle, hitting a deer could mean shitting in a bag for the rest of your life. Everyone who rode a motorcycle had a deer story. It was a bit like how everyone with a Bachelor of Arts degree had a public urination story. Personally, Bambi had almost killed me more times than I cared to remember. The first time I ever took a motorcycle on a public road, a pack of 4 deer jumped in front of me, the last slipping on the pavement, going down like it was trying to slide tackle me off the bike. Once doing 40 on a road so busy it was one indecisive squirrel away from a 12-car pileup, a buck leapt from tree cover, bounding straight for me. It jumped once, twice. The third would have put it on top of me with nowhere to go, but at the last second it stopped short. It looked at me from the edge of the pavement as if to say, "April Fools!" I rode past so close that I could have reached out and patted its head. Another memorable near accident came while riding a stretch of road protected by a line of Jersey barriers on either breakdown lane. I relaxed a little, thinking there was no way anything was going to come over the 3-foot-tall concrete walls running the length of the road. Just as I let my mind wander, 2 hooves shot over one of the barriers to my left, and a 130-pound deer crawled over, its stomach scraping the top like a fat kid wheezing his way through an obstacle course. We shared a lane for a terrifying second before I revved the engine and put some distance between myself and the homicidal ruminant. My latest near miss with the mule deer had me wide awake and oblivious to the cold that'd been my only concern 5 minutes earlier. I made good time as I wandered southwest across Oregon toward the Pacific Coast Highway. The terrain changed from the snow-spotted mountains of Hell's Canyon National Recreation Area to stretches of desert that looked like they'd never seen rain, and eventually back to thick mountain forest in a single day, losing and gaining over 3,000 feet in elevation. It was hard to believe that such extreme climates could exist in one country, let alone one state. I stopped for fuel in the town of Mitchell at a set of pumps that looked abandoned. They were the old style, with a hook on each side and a rolling counter to keep track of how much you'd pumped. Unlike most gas stations, there was no convenience store adjacent to the pumps selling shiny packs of gum and neon-colored energy drinks. And when I stepped off my bike, I wasn't sure where I paid. 50 feet away, sitting in a lawn chair in the shade, a gray-haired man pushed himself to his feet and walked toward me. He was huge. I stood between 5'11 and 6'1, depending on how bad I felt about having an advanced degree in make-believe, and I barely came up to his nose. Like so many older big men, he walked as if he were filled with broken bones that hadn't set right. With his sheer size and strange walk, he could have been responsible for all the Bigfoot sightings in the Pacific Northwest. "Fill it up?" he asked, plucking the nozzle from its cradle with his massive paw and holding it out to me. Almost anywhere else, a man walking up to you while you pump gas would have been an oddity, or possibly a prelude to a carjacking. But in Oregon, it was normal, because Oregon's state legislature believed that its citizens were too stupid to work a gas pump. It was one of only 2 states that thought trusting people to pilot 2-ton road hogs at highway speeds while distracted by eating, the radio, an onboard DVD player, and screaming children was just fine, but allowing them to fuel up that deathmobile without professional assistance was just too risky. It seemed like one of those weird laws that you hear about but never expect to see enforced, like it being illegal to take a bath with a donkey. But Oregon actually enforced it. At every gas station in the state, an attendant sat by the pumps, waiting to do the highly technical task of swiping a credit card and lifting a nozzle. For cars, the attendant filled the tanks, but when a bike pulled in, the attendant would get the pump started and then hand the nozzle over to the rider. Because even politicians were smart enough to know that no minimum wage job was worth the repercussions of accidentally scratching the paint on a Hell's Angels tank. In a car, having a gas station attendant wasn't too awkward because you could always roll up your window, listen to the radio, or try to dig a franchise worth of mummified McDonald's French fries from the cracks between the seats. But on a bike, it was as awkward as meeting your girlfriend's parents for the first time and trying to explain how an advanced degree in make-believe was a valid career choice. I always felt stupid waiting for someone to pick up and hand me a gas nozzle, as if when I hit the Oregon border, I suddenly lost the ability to run simple machines. I knew how to run a gas pump. The attendant knew that I knew how to run a gas pump, but he still had to stand there and help. The whole situation was like having someone try to help you tie your shoe. Making things worse, I wasn't sure if I was allowed to put the nozzle back on the pump when I was done, or if I had to hand it back to the attendant so he could hang it up. It wasn't a problem as long as he stayed next to me while I pumped, but occasionally one would wander off and I'd be stuck waiting there with a nozzle in my hand, afraid that the service station secret police would tackle me if I tried to put it back without trained professional help. "Where are you coming from?" the big guy asked, leaning against the pump while I filled my tank. "Hell's Canyon last night, Boise the day before," I said. "Where are you headed?" "New Hampshire," I said, keeping an eye on my tank. His big head cocked to one side and his face took on an expression like he wasn't sure if he should speak or not. Finally he said, "You know you're heading the wrong direction, right?" I released the handle as the gas swirled to the top of the tank, then aimed the nozzle so the last few drops didn't fall on my paint. "I've been getting that a lot lately," I said as I held the nozzle out for him. "I'm headed to the Pacific Coast first." He looked at the nozzle, then at me as if to say, "Why don't you just hang the stupid thing back up," before taking it, hooking it in its cradle, and reading the price aloud. "See any deer today?" I nodded, handing over the cash, and told him about my close call with the mule deer. "My daughter's boyfriend, he was a biker," he said. "He lived up in Seattle and decided he'd come down to visit one summer on this little rice rocket. Ended up hitting a deer in the mountains." "Oh God," I said. I wasn't sure why he was telling me this. Telling a biker about deer crashes as he was about to go for a ride was like entertaining a vasectomy patient with tales of medical malpractice just before the anesthesia kicks in. The image of shattered plastic, broken bones, and leaking vital fluids, both human and vehicular, along a lonely mountain road popped into my mind with more clarity than I would have wanted. I could see the bits of mirror glinting in the sun and the extra joints midway down a forearm. The bike slipping off the edge of the road, crashing through the evergreens below, shearing limbs and axles. The rider lying in the road, praying that a car came soon and that the driver was paying attention. "Yeah, launched him 30 feet, but he didn't get hurt. The big man shook his head. He called his mother to pick him up and take him home. Then he got on a big old cruiser, headed back down. Ended up hitting an elk. Sounds messy? I said. Those same mental images appearing again, only magnified, because elk were considerably bigger than deer. Not too bad. Ruined the bike, but he didn't get hurt that time either. He ought to invest in lottery tickets, I said. The big man rubbed his cheek, looking at my bike. Must have been a hell of a rider to fly 30 feet and not get hurt. Wouldn't that make him good at crashing instead? He smiled and laughed through his nose. I never thought of it that way. Come to think of it, he never did make it down here. He waved and walked back to his lawn chair, waiting in the shade. Ride safe, he called as he sat down. The gas station giant's conversation was a reminder that Harley-Davidson commercials lied. I know it was hard to fathom that the medium that brought us the sham wow guy would intentionally mislead you, but it was true. And so did Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki, Indian, and every other motorcycle maker that sold bikes based on the classic badass, freedom, sex appeal ad campaigns. Based on their 30-second clips, motorcycle makers wanted you to believe that riding one of their bikes made you tougher than a street fighter, gave you more freedom than a minivan, and would have members of the opposite sex throwing themselves at you like you had solid gold vibrating genitals. But it was all bullshit. The badass tough guy advertising line was the most obvious lie because, other than a slow-moving possum, a biker was the most vulnerable thing on the road. No amount of leather or tattoos could make up for the fact that every time you straddled your machine, you put your life in the hands of every drunk driver, distracted soccer mom, and texting teen on the road. For that reason, I always found it funny when gangs based themselves around bikes. A grandmother in a Buick could wipe out a dozen bikers just by crossing the double yellow while fiddling with her radio, which was why I proposed motorcycle gangs ditch their bikes and invest in CDLs and Mack trucks. And it wasn't just idiot teenagers popping wheelies down the highway or leathery old drunks shooting whiskey and hopping on their bikes that got killed. You could do everything right and still end up dead because some asshole in an Audi spilled coffee on his crotch. Freedom was harder to prove a lie because images of a man in black rolling through the desert with the wind whipping past and sun beating down looked an awful lot like freedom. After all, there was no room for a child safety seat on a motorcycle, but bikes which left their riders open to the elements were limited by the weather and conditions. There was a reason that the motorcycle manufacturers' commercials didn't show a guy with blue skin and snot icicles shivering his way through a snowstorm. Sure, you could dress up like an Eskimo to ride in the winter, and you could also catch a patch of black ice and spend the rest of your days cruising in a hover round. Riding in rain was also possible, but painful and dangerous. Because of the weather, New Hampshire riding season consisted of the 4 sunny days between mud season and first snow, which was why most of the riders I knew didn't get more than 1,500 miles a year. As for sex appeal, I could confidently say that my motorcycle had never gotten me laid. But that might be more my fault than the bike's. I did get hit on one time because I rode. I was standing in a store, my helmet dangling from my backpack, when an absolutely gorgeous brunette turned to me and said, "Do you ride a motorcycle?" With 3 pounds of plastic and foam hanging from my hip, it was an obvious icebreaker, meant to spark a conversation. Anyone with the least bit of social skills would have said, "Yeah, do you?" and from there offered to take her for a ride, getting her phone number along the way. Because I lacked the social skills God gave most crazed hermits, I said, "No, the doctor said I should wear my helmet whenever I leave the house, but my head got sweaty, so I took it off." I didn't get her number, but I did get a very confused look before she hurried away. What all 3 of the main advertising tactics missed out on was that riding a motorcycle was therapy. Doing anything for an extended period of time that could potentially kill or maim you had a therapeutic value, as opposed to things like bungee jumping and skydiving, which were short but intense activities that had their own values, mostly Darwinian in nature. There was something about that danger that forced you to clear your mind of all outside distractions and concentrate completely on what you were doing. As soon as you straddled a bike, everyday distractions disappeared. Suddenly, the fight with your girlfriend was gone, and your job, or inability to find one, didn't matter. Anything outside of riding vanished. Besides riding a motorcycle, the only thing that had ever given me the same feeling was running a chainsaw. I didn't understand why motorcycle commercials insisted on staying with the old badass freedom sexy trifecta. With the amount of money Americans paid to lay on couches and bitch about their parents while downing antidepressants, you'd think therapy would be an easy selling point. Then again, catharsis was a lot harder to get across in a 30-second TV spot than a blonde bending at the waist in a pair of hot pants. I pulled away from the pump, and with directions written on the palm of my clutch hand, who needed GPS when you had 6th grade girl technology, headed toward Route 242. I'd chosen Route 242 the same highly scientific way I'd picked all the roads on this trip. I'd opened my map and stuck my finger on the squiggliest line I saw that wasn't a river. Beyond being squiggly, it offered a series of campgrounds spread out over its length. Multiple campgrounds meant that I had a better chance of finding one just before dark, and if I missed one or it was full, then I wouldn't have far to ride before the next. I didn't notice it until the next morning, but on the map next to my intended route was a white and red box that read, "This route closed in winter. Vehicle lengths over 35 feet are prohibited." It was the only road on the entire map with that warning, and deservedly so. Route 242 was closed for the winter on October 25th, 2010, and didn't reopen to traffic until July 15th, 2011, for a total of 254 consecutive days closed, a long winter by anything short of Ice Age standards. During that time, the state blocked the road with a thick steel I-beam gate at each end, but the bar was probably unnecessary since 30-foot snowdrifts were still blocking the road well into May. By the time I rode onto it in early August, Route 242 had only been clear of snow for less than a month. Built in the 1920s, the modern Highway 242 roughly followed an old wagon road that had been originally made by pioneers and then used as a toll road by people trying to get supplies to gold mines in Idaho. It was a twisting ribbon of pavement cutting through forested wilderness and barren lava fields. The sides of the road alternated between steep drop-offs and walls of lava rock as tall as a house pressing against either side. While the 1964 Wilderness Act called for no temporary or permanent roads being built inside wilderness areas, there was nothing that said two different wilderness areas couldn't exist right next to one another with only a thin two-lane blacktop separating the two. Thankfully, this would be the one and only loophole ever found in a congressional bill. The 36-mile road cutting between Sister and Mackenzie Bridge exploited that loophole nicely, cutting between the 286,708-acre Three Sisters Wilderness area to the south and the 52,738-acre Mount Washington Wilderness area to the north. Technically, each wilderness area began 66 feet from the center line of Route 242, but as far as nature was concerned, the little slash of asphalt didn't exist. Driving west from Sisters through the Deschutes National Forest, the road was smooth and quick with woods lining both sides, but it wasn't wilderness yet. It looked more like a manicured park than a national forest. The trees were spaced out with a thick bed of brown needles and little underbrush or fallen limbs visible from the road. No snags or widowmakers hung in the treetops. As I rode further from Sisters, the forest gave way to landscape I'd never imagined existing in Oregon. The Pacific Northwest brought to mind temperate rainforests, giant trees covered in blankets of thick green moss, and ocean crashing against beautiful beaches, not to mention pot plants the size of redwood trees. But, as the road climbed, the forest suddenly gave way to endless fields of volcanic rock. Instead of thick, dark green woods, fields of hard, jagged volcanic rock ran from the edge of the asphalt as far as I could see, covering mountains, craters, and running up both edges of Route 242. It was as if I'd started out in Oregon and ended up on some alien planet. As the surrounding landscape changed from wood to stone, the road gave up its long, slow curves for hard, sharp cutbacks. Rising toward Mackenzie Pass, walls of black rock towered overhead at the road's edges. I took to turn slowly, not testing my chicken strips, because it was one thing to dump a bike and go skidding off into the woods, and quite another to smash into a wall of unforgiving stone. Route 242 topped out at the 5,187-foot Mackenzie Pass, the walls of black rock falling away to give access to the Wright Observatory. Surrounded on all sides by lava-filled wilderness and miles from any town or building, I couldn't help but wonder who would want to take the time, effort, and money to build an observatory in the definition of the middle of nowhere. The answer was Franklin D. Roosevelt, and the reason was the Great Depression. Built by the Civilian Conservation Corps from local lava on the side of Route 242, the black, jagged stones set in mortar formed a castle-like building, growing out of a huge mound of strewn rock. From a distance, the gray mortar was almost invisible, blending into the dark stones so that it appeared as if the entire building was made from rocks expertly balanced on one another. A chain handrail ran up the length of the path to the entrance, separating the stairs from a field of strewn lava. Black, shadowed windows looked like empty eye sockets. The building's circular shape and dark color brought to mind childhood cartoons where world-conquering supervillains lived in skull-shaped fortresses in the sides of volcanoes, and I was a bit disappointed to discover that the observatory never housed a death ray. I parked my bike in the single line of parking spots across the road from the observatory, pulled out my camera, and snapped pictures as I followed the path into the first floor, a solid mass of dark stone with lava tube viewing portals that let in light. Each tube was a viewing portal with a carved block beneath, giving the name of the geological feature it pointed towards. There was a tube for Mount Washington, the Belknap crater, whose eruptions created one of the largest lava fields in America, and the Sisters Mountains, among others. Looking through the lava tube at Mount Washington, a 7,794-foot volcano, I had to remind myself that I was still in Oregon. Mount Washington sat in 65 square miles of lava-covered plains. The land was black as coal, with massive hunks of stone set roughly against each other. Only the occasional gray, dead tree gave the hint that something could actually live there. From the Mount Washington lava tube, I crossed the room to look out at the Sister Mountains that the Three Sisters Wilderness was named for. In the foreground, a field of lava eventually gave way to a belt of coniferous forest. Above the trees, the Three Sisters, black mountains dotted with gleaming white glaciers, dominated the landscape. The 10,000-plus foot peaks named North Sister, Middle Sister, and South Sister had almost been named Faith, Hope, and Charity, but the Oregon Geographic Names Board shut that idea down in 1975. A good thing, as it would have destroyed my theory about that 12-year-old naming everything out west. After staring out each viewing portal, I walked up to the exposed second story, where a 36-inch bronze peak finder was set waist-high in the center of the roof. It looked like a massive sundial with its stile broken off. Radiating from the center were the names of the surrounding mountains, and by sighting down the name, you were pointed toward the corresponding peak. I took pictures of everything: the far-off mountains and glaciers, the observatory itself, the view from the lava tubes, the viewfinder, even the road. But what drew most of my attention were the wind-tormented trees spread throughout the lavascape. These were the trees that landscaped hell, their limbs warped and twisted, tops bent crooked, dead, gray, and bark stripped. They'd taken root in cracks between rough boulders, some of them growing to 20 feet tall before giving in to the harsh climate. Some looked like arthritic hands bent and crippled, others like something from a fairy tale. Not the musical singing trees Disney kind, but the old world ones where children were always getting eviscerated. By far, what most impressed me about the D. Wright Observatory, Mackenzie Pass, and Route 242 was that I'd never heard of it. I'd simply stumbled across this amazing chunk of wilderness because of dumb luck and a need for a campsite. I'd never read or been told about the amazing road, the views from the volcanic lands, or the Skull Island-looking observatory, and I didn't understand why. The observatory had been built at the same time as the Hoover Dam and Empire State Building, but unlike those places, there was no one hawking hot dogs or trying to sell you overpriced t-shirts. It wasn't as if people weren't interested in the volcanic landscape either. Craters of the Moon, a national monument centered around the same kind of volcanic landscape, received over 200,000 visitors a year. Route 242, the only way to access the observatory, averaged only 420 cars a day, and the road was closed for large portions of the year. It couldn't be that the D. Wright Observatory was too far out of the way, since Craters was in the middle of nowhere in the Idaho desert. I'd visited both places, and could honestly say that the D. Wright Observatory, with its mountains, glaciers, seemingly endless expanse of black rock boulders, and the sliver of winding pavement that was its only access, made Craters of the Moon look about as wild and exotic as a Walmart parking lot. I finally pulled myself away from the observatory and lava fields and descended on my bike into the mountain wilderness to the west of Mackenzie Pass. Dropping into the forest, the road made a series of sharp, descending cuts with steep, guardrail-less drop-offs to one side and climbing mountain on the other. From either side of the road, trees towered over me, their branches touching overhead, making a living tunnel. It was a sharp contrast to all the dead, black rock that lined the road on the other side of the pass. As I rode deeper into the wilderness, it felt like I was inside a living thing, as if I was a flea running along some massive animal's back and the trees were its hair. This was deep, rugged wilderness, like I'd only caught a glimpse of while standing at the edge of the Hell's Canyon wilderness area. Here I was as close to what wilderness looked like 1,000 years ago as I was ever going to be. Thick, green moss grew over fallen limbs and rocks along stream beds. I'd never seen such a diversity in a single color before, with each plant and leaf bringing its own interpretation of green. The dark needles of coniferous trees mixed with the light green of ferns and the middle green of bushes and shrubs. I couldn't see much more than a few feet into the forest, and the forest stretched further than I could imagine. It was still early, but the thick forest canopy blocked most of the light, so I found a campground and set up with my tent flap facing a mountain stream and the bulk of the 52,738-acre Mount Washington wilderness. With my campsite set up and having eaten dinner, I sat outside my tent listening to the woods, seeing if my ears could peer deeper than my eyes. I could hear the stream flowing over stones and the rustle of leaves and snap of twigs from animals moving somewhere beyond sight. Sitting in the forest like that, my imagination wandered. Suddenly, I could see why people out there believed in Bigfoot. It wasn't that I'd become a true believer and was about to run out and get my doctorate in cryptozoology. An English BA and creative writing MFA were enough useless degrees for one lifetime. But surrounded by that kind of wilderness, I could understand how others believed. I'd spent more than my fair share of time laughing at people on television making throaty ape calls into the darkness in an attempt to make contact with an imaginary hairy monster. It was impossible not to make jokes when an obese bearded man, glowing green under night vision, argued that the only logical explanation for the sound of a falling tree branch was that a mythical half-step between ape and man was trying to ward off its slightly less hairy cousin. After all, if we'd become so advanced that a satellite orbiting the Earth could shoot an invisible beam into my living room so I could watch the Hooters International Swimsuit Pageant at 10 o'clock at night, then there was no way a 7-foot-tall primate could live in the lower 48 without having its own reality TV show. Sitting on a couch in the middle of the suburbs with a bag of processed corn product and light, heat, and water all controlled by the flip of a switch, it was easy to make fun of those people. But surrounded by 339,440 acres of wilderness, it was a lot harder to be so sure. Officially a Sasquatch agnostic, Sasquastic, I crawled into my foot-stink tent and slept like a rock.